Well, good morning, everybody. It's an absolute delight to welcome you all to our webinar this morning. My name's Martin. I'm from CPR Learning, and I'm joined today by a fantastic panel of guests who I'd like to introduce you to very shortly. So today we're going to be diving into the subject of mental health in hospitality, and particularly on how leaders at any level can support their teams through the difficult times that we're certainly facing now, but in any time, to be frank. And so we've got a number of questions, a number of areas we're going to be going through. It's just going to be a fantastic, engaging discussion this morning. But we'd like you very much to get involved too. So on your GoToWebinar panel, you should see a tab there that is entitled Questions. So please, at any stage, fire through any questions or comments that you have. We'd love to hear from them and bring those into our discussion today. Fantastic. So without further ado, I'm going to ask our panelists now to introduce themselves. So Dom, can I start with you, Squire?
Sure. My name is Dom Jones. I'm one of the co-founders of Maray Restaurant Group. We're based in Liverpool with 3 sites currently, looking to expand next year. Yeah, we serve Middle Eastern inspired small plates, loads of good cocktails, nice wine. So yeah, that's me and that's what we do.
Fantastic. Many thanks, Dom. Many thanks. I'm moving on to Katie. Katie, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Katie. I'm a final year international hospitality management student at the University of Wolverhampton. I started my hospitality career around 6 years ago, predominantly in theatre hospitality initially. I also did a summer working in Walt Disney World in the Magic Kingdom, and last year did my placement year in London working for a private household with a lot of events and banqueting experience. And towards the start of this year, towards lockdown time, I started to get involved with a not-for-profit called So Let's Talk, which provide preventative and holistic trainings on mental, physical and financial health, specifically for the hospitality industry.
Fabulous. Thank you, Katie. Mark, tell us about yourself, Squire.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Mark Ind. I've been 23 years a hotel general manager in many different properties. Most recently, the Holiday Inn London Mayfair at the top of Berkeley Street, opposite the Ritz, which closed in January for a big 2-year redevelopment. So many have said I sort of got out of the industry just at the right time, but that doesn't mean so I haven't been keeping in touch with what's been going on. I've spoken to a lot of colleagues and friends and about some of the challenges that they've had. But in the meantime, I've taken the time to write a book. I never set out to be an author. The book is called 50 Days of Lockdown. For anyone that's interested in it, it's a chronology.
No doubt available from all good stockists.
And on Amazon, yes, of course, just published. But I cover in that a chronology of the virus, both personally and from a perspective of what actually happened. I live in Chandler's Ford down in the deep south near Southampton, and very pleased to be here today.
Fabulous. Thank you, Mark. It's a delight to have you. Peter, last but by no means least.
Hello, good morning, everybody. So my name is Peter Abbott. I'm the training director for an organisation called the Mind Map. And we help clients with regards to counselling services, and we also deliver training, mental health training for some clients as well. I'm an accredited instructor for Mental Health First Aid England, so I'm licensed to deliver all of their 4 adult courses. I also am a qualified teacher and assessor. So that's me in a quick nutshell of who I am.
Fabulous. Thank you, Peter. And I think, as you can see, everybody, we've got a great sort of range and some different perspectives. So I'm dying to explore some of the topics we're thinking about. So we'll kick off straight away, if that's good. So what we're thinking of, first of all, is the stresses and strains of reopening and closing sites, and what impact that has had on individuals, and maybe how team leaders can create the right environments, or any other top tips that our panelists may have on how to deal with that opening and closure stress that is caused. So can I ask Dom first of all, because I know you will have been, from a leadership point of view, through the lockdown systems that we've been in place. So stresses and strains, have you seen that from your teams?
We have, but we've tried to take the burden as a leadership team. It's been very much, we've had to obviously digest and interpret all the information that's come, and we feel that we've got to get to grips with it very, very quickly before passing it on to our teams. And one thing, I made some notes this morning, and one thing we set out to do really early was take everything really seriously, in terms of understanding the new guidelines, creating new standard operating procedures, which is we talk about in our company SOPs, which is a new phrase for us. But what we found is when our team came back, they could see how seriously we'd taken this, and we didn't have a playbook for opening after a pandemic. I don't think many restaurants did, but we had to write one. And day one of our staff coming back for 4 or 5 days of training, they could see we were taking it seriously, and that put them at ease straight away, which was really, really important to us. And then I heard stories of other operators who didn't really take this approach, and that not taking that approach, it's felt by your guests who walk through the doors as well. You know, the feedback we've received since reopening has been amazing, and I believe that's down to our team taking everything really seriously and putting those guests at ease very, very quickly through clear communication and solid procedures. So that was a big thing for us in terms of getting ready to reopening, and going back a little further to closing sites and having to close. Our number one priority was the communication with the teams, right. Keeping them in the loop daily. It really was daily at the start, because everyone was nervous. Nobody had done this before. People were worried about jobs. There was all talk of redundancies. You know, before furlough was announced, it was, you know, terrible anxiety for everybody. You know, not just leaders of the businesses, but people whose livelihoods were at risk. So we set out as a leadership team to communicate really clearly, quickly, and honestly as well, being as transparent as we could be. You know, it was okay to show some vulnerability.
Yes.
There was no point pretending we had everything under control, and because we didn't. We really didn't. All we could do was manage what we could control, which was getting the information to our teams. So yeah, that's a lot of the stresses and the strains and how we've managed it. Yeah, I hope that's answered that query.
Yeah, very much so, Dom, and raises some really interesting perspectives. I particularly like how you talked about it enables leaders to be transparent and perhaps authentic, because, you know, no one in the world could profess to have the answers to the situation that the world found itself in, you know, which largely is unfounded. So there was no other place to be, was there? Maybe on other topics, sometimes leaders are perhaps tempted to try and pull the wool, try and pretend they know things they don't, and maybe not so authentic. But I love the idea that transparency has really come through, and the communication. I'm really interested that you picked on that straight away, and it makes absolute sense that, you know, that would help. How have you found this sort of second lockdown? So we got open, didn't we, as an industry, and then, you know, through both the tier system and the lockdown 2, we've gone back in. What were the stresses like going back into lockdown?
Going back in, much lower. As soon as you've done something once, you feel more confident about doing it again. As we spoke pre-call, this time we had ideas for new revenue streams, and that helped keep some people in work, helped us get different sources of revenue stream. And we took the approach, and I've seen other operators and owners taking a different approach. We took the approach of, okay, well, they said they're going to reopen on the 3rd of December. We're going we're going to be ready for that, and that's going to be the message to our team. I've seen some other operators thinking, oh, well, I don't think that's going to happen. And if that's your stance, then your team are going to feel nervous, worried, and can't see an end to this. And yeah, you know, they might have been right. We may not reopen, but our attitude was we're working towards that, and we'll be ready for that. And it looks like we are going to be able to reopen. So the doom and gloomers, I don't know, they've got a week to turn their attitudes around and lift a team who probably were ready for Christmas not working. So
yes,
yeah, we've took loads of learnings from the first lockdown, and whilst I'm proud of how we handled it as a leadership team, we didn't get everything right, but this time we've done a lot right, we think, and we've tried to again ramp up the communication, training, different sources of revenue. We've been really busy, so it's been a positive lockdown for us, and it's been nice to see a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel.
Fabulous. Fabulous. Thanks, Dom. And sorry to keep with you just for the moment, but just before I move on, I'm going to move on to Mark very shortly, but we just had a question in, which is a lovely perspective coming in from Patrick, who asks, Dom, you mentioned taking the burden on as a leadership team. Do you have any avenues of support for your leadership team that are taking on that burden? And indeed, I'd probably stretch that to say for yourself as well, because you know, as leaders, if you're taking on that burden, you're taking on that burden as a founder. How do you support your leaders and yourself?
No, it's a really good question. I think the answer is supporting each other. You know, because we've spoken about this in the past, Martin, but one-to-ones are a big part of our culture at Maray, and what that is you and your manager sit down once a week and you just chat how you're feeling, how the week's been. It's not a case of how you're getting on with this task. It's how you're feeling about your work this week. And a little bit of a side note to this story is we worked really hard to implement these in the company, but after a year, me and my two business partners, Tom and James, we realized, you know what, we're not doing this for ourselves. And we were putting all the energy into making sure our teams had these spaces to talk to each other and open up, and we weren't doing that for ourselves. And we thought, we've got to, you know, look after number one here. So we started doing that between each other, and that's continued in lockdown. So we'll catch up for half an hour, 45 minutes each week, and it's just how's your week been? And we make sure that happens with all our leaders as well. And yeah, that's the big support network really between each other. And there are weeks where some people are fine, and there are weeks where you've got COVID blues. Yeah. We're all going through it, and sometimes you just need to talk just talking at someone. They don't even have to provide you with all the answers. You feel a little lighter leaving the room. So yeah, that's the answer really to how as a leadership team we're supporting each other. It's definitely a
fantastic. Thanks, Dom. Great insight and great tips for all the leaders out there. You know, the good old one-to-one, which again Dom refers to. And when we first spoke, I was kind of cognizant that a lot of companies in the industry, quite standard practice to do one-to-ones. What amazed me with Dom and Maray was the frequency of them. I think, you know, it's interesting that that's helped you through this period as well, Dom. So fantastic. Mark, your perspective, Squire. So, you know, you weren't sort of operating through lockdown, but needless, I'm sure you've had experiences of closing sites and reopening sites. What stresses and strains have you seen in those times amongst your team?
So quite interestingly, I just closed the Holiday Inn Mayfair, which was almost a 3-month process. And I think right from the start, when the rumours started going around that the hotel was closing, that in itself created something that Dom mentioned, which is this word anxiety. And some of you will be familiar with what I term as the ORM process, from forming, storming, norming, performing. We're all norming, we're all performing, and then suddenly there's this rumour that the hotel's closing, and the anxiety about what's going to happen to us in the future. And I think most importantly, people want answers, and they want honesty, and they want clarity, and they want transparency. And I was very lucky that I worked with an owner that every question that was asked of me, and often their financial, often their security about jobs in the future, I was able to pose those to the owner, who came back very quickly with clarity and honesty. And again, Dom touched on it. I think when we communicate to people, we can often sort of skirt around the edges. But actually, what people really want is a bit of honesty. Because if you look at the cycle of grief and something like a hotel closing, it's almost like a grief situation. You want people to go from the denial situation to acceptance. You can start looking forward and planning and providing people with that key support as to what actually is going to happen to them in the future. So that's my experience from closure, and actually it was a very smooth closure. And we had a really nice party with the staff at the end. I keep in touch with a lot of the team even now, just offering sort of help and guidance from afar. So I think you mentioned communication, that's really important. And throughout that process, and actually throughout my hotel career, I have been doing one-to-ones with every single member of the team. And it's about the frequency, and it's about what you say. But I think sometimes when you just say to someone, "Are you okay?" and you give them that opportunity just to share how they are really feeling about themselves. And it is often in the workplace, how we feel as people in our home lives and in our personal lives, we sometimes bring that to work, and it is very, very difficult if you're not feeling great about yourself, or there's something going on in your life that's really stressful. As an employer, I want to know about that so that I can empathise and I can understand and I can listen and hear and almost provide a route forward to help with that really pressurised mental situation that person is going through. I think as leaders, how we deal with anxiety often is the real touchy human stuff that we often do with our families. And I've always run a hotel like I'm the big brother or the dad, and it's a family of 80, 100, 150 people, but you've got to be personal with every single person. The quiet ones are the ones, in my opinion, that we should almost keep an eye on more, because they just get on and do their job. You hear about the loud, emotional people, and you can deal with that. The quiet ones, I think it's important to understand what's going on in their worlds as well. So that's my perspective on it.
Fabulous, Mark. Some wonderful insights there, and some of the areas you touched on. I'm gonna park some of those in my mind and come back to Peter very shortly, because I'm going to ask Peter some of the elements you talked about there. I think there could be some interesting academic elements that Peter can maybe advise why people are feeling that way and why some of the elements you've suggested are so important. But before I do that, I'm just going to go to Katie and ask, Katie, you're very much in a different perspective of your hospitality leadership career. From your perspective of sort of working in the trade, were you working during the first lockdown, or did you?
I was, yeah. So
Wow, okay.
I was still on my placement in London at the time. So I was kind of middle of my placement, about 7 to 8 months in. So that was an interesting time, because we had, for the company I was working for, we had an incredibly busy time coming up. May was going to be incredibly busy with us, with banquets and events and all kinds of business. So that was a major switch, and we started to ramp down a little bit coming towards lockdown, because you could see how it was starting to pan out, as I'm sure most people would. And you kind of, with the events, of course, they were the first things to go, even before general hospitality. So we started to ramp down already, but there was still that uncertainty of how far does this need to go, and is it going to be completely out? because the mention of social distancing and whatnot, banqueting, like receptions, canapé receptions, that kind of thing, everyone's mingling. It was very much a question of what we could do, and the answer was very little. So there was a lot of focus on redeployment of the teams at that point.
Oh, what fantastic, Katie. And what was the feeling like amongst you and your team, you know, your fellow team colleagues? You know, what were the stress levels like with that sort of,
it was very much initially kind of vaguely what Mark touched on, and I've been writing a piece of content on this about the mourning process of losing a part of your life that was part of you for so long. And working in the private household as I was, you live your job, you live in at the position, and you are there all the time. You work and live with the same people, so it's very much becomes a part of yourself and who you are. So at the time, there was kind of a part of, like in any grieving process, a little bit of denial at the start, a little bit, oh, it'll blow over, you know, we might go into lockdown for a week and it'll be fine, we can carry on again. So there was that little bit of denial and kind of nervous giggling, kind of anxious tension at the time. And then, like in any process, it starts to dawn on you that this is the reality. So it started to kind of move into the stage of upset and a lot of emotion and a lot of tension, and it was very much, you could kind of see little splinters within the teams of various places that I've worked with during that time, where everybody started to realize their own situation, and it started, obviously, the importance of focusing on yourself and what you needed to do for yourself at that time and what was important for your family. Because in that job, we all lived away from our family, we lived together. So it was a case of, right, do I get home? How can I get home? Who's best for me to go and live with? Is there anybody vulnerable? It was very much, we all started to kind of close off ourselves and look at our own little bubbles of our lives. And then we kind of came to the realization of, okay, this is slightly more long term, but we all started to kind of open up a bit more to each other about how it was making us feel, and kind of before we went into the full lockdown, we started to realize that certain members of the team felt more vulnerable than others. And it's like a good friend at So Let's Talk said to me the other day, education happens when people listen, but people can't listen until people start talking. And that really resonated with me, that kind of during that time, because that was exactly what happened. You know, we were all kind of waiting to learn from each other as to how to react or how other people were reacting to this, but we didn't have that capacity to listen until people started talking. And towards the end there, before we went into lockdown, people started talking, and that was the first step to us kind of really coming together as a team and realizing the situation and helping collectively to get over this grief of losing, at the time, the job and the life that we were so used to.
wow, fantastic, Katie. I think that's so interesting to hear your perspective and such a detailed perspective. So thank you so much for that. So much learning for us all in that. And I love the idea how you touch upon that learning process. And I totally agree. You know, what we were all going through early on was a massive social learning process. No one had the answers. We're all learning from each other. So, you know, some of the elements you've all picked on today about communicating and the one-to-ones and all those things, they're absolute fantastic tools for leaders to grab hold of and to enable this communication and this learning to take place. So thank you very much for that. Peter, I bet you're sat there just loving the idea of some of these concepts that are coming through. And I thought,
absolutely,
Peter, the concepts of grieving that both Katie and Mark touched upon about losing something. Could you give us a sort of academic perspective on why something like an pandemic like we've had or we're having, and the fact of closing a business and going through reopening, why would that sort of simulate almost a grieving process in an individual?
Thank you. Yeah, there's been some amazing comments on what people are doing to be able to support team members and to support the business and trying to navigate what's going on. Nobody expected 2020. Nobody expected this to come along. I'll be perfectly honest, when we first heard the news of it back in January, I thought it would be a little bit like swine flu maybe, or something that we didn't really, it was afar. It wasn't going to touch us on a personal level. And we saw that to be very, very different. So when it comes to what's happening at this moment in time, we've gone from normal living mode to survival mode. And because of all the changes that are being enforced upon us, and we have to need the change of the business, etc. So what happens there is, as an individual, what happens to us when and we talk about anxiousness, Mark's talk about anxiety and anxiousness and stress and what this is. As human beings, we're only built to sustain a certain amount of stress over a period of time. And what's happened with businesses opening and closing, and as Dom was saying, it's all new for business leaders. Most business leaders have never faced these sort of challenges before. So they're themselves at the top are unsure, which way do we go? What guidelines have we got? What new ways of working do we need to think about and implement? What training do we need to perhaps put the staff through so that they've got the autonomy to do their roles? And I think that is a big thing when it comes to it. So what have we done? When we talk about the loss of it, we absolutely have, because all areas of our lives have been impacted. It's not just work, but work is the main one. That routine's gone, and that's been out. There's that uncertainty about when are we going to get back into work. Yes, from the point of view of the government said we're going to pay furlough wages, and that's okay, but there was still a shortfall there. So what happened then was we had like a perfect storm of all different areas of individuals' lives which were starting to be impacted. We had work, we had finances, we had the fear of the COVID virus itself. We had the fear of the news headlines, and all the clickbait headlines were just prophesizing doom and gloom and scaring individuals. So there was this alertness. What happened is we have an early warning detection system built in as human beings, and that's what stress is. That's how it was built. That's how it was. We evolved with it. All of the species have exactly the same prehistoric system as well. But what we do as humans, that same system, we've only got that one system. So what happens there is we can have an intrusive thought. It's going to trigger that system. We have to open and close the restaurant. It's going to trigger that system. We're going to, where Katie was saying that you were living in-house and you were working from where you were living at the same time. But then the changes there. What do I do? Which bubble do I go back to? When am I going to come back to work? So there's all this uncertainty that's around at this moment in time, and still continuing to go on. We've got to put structure in place, particularly with the hospitality. People such as Dom who've gone, okay, then this is what we're dealing with. What do we need to put in place? How does the business need to evolve? And you were talking quite right, Dom, when you were talking about communication. It's paramount with regards to this. But because at the beginning of all this, and we were going, actually, communication is limited because business leaders couldn't communicate anything out to the teams because they didn't know. And they were in the same position as the rest of the teams. So what everybody did, we were all sort of going, right, shock. We go into that shock phase and we go, right, okay, then what's happening? Life's changing beyond anything that we recognise. We were told to lock down. We were told to isolate. We were told to work from home. We were told to not mix outside of social bubbles. Of course, life changed acutely at that point in time. And as I say, we haven't dealt with this, and this is a chronic stress situation, and that's what happens. So we go into the shock phase. I want
to grab that. Can I dive in at that point, Peter? Because I think you summed that really well. That all these changes that are taking place, so much rapid change, creating that stress, and I think you've brought that through lovely. And I want to just switch the angle of thinking now, just to think about not only have our teams experienced that level of stress, but also obviously our guests, and that's led to a certain element of conflict. And I just want to explore with ourselves now, how have team members been able to deal with that conflict, the difficult experiences of having to enforce the rules, and has that been stressful for team members, and how as leaders have you, or how should we support our team members? So I'm going to dive down to Katie first off, just to see, again, you might have had some first-hand experiences of dealing with that conflict from guests that, again, maybe not sticking to the rules. So yeah, take us away, Katie.
Yeah, so again, like most people, initially the whole slight denial that this was gonna touch our lives, as Peter has said, and kind of the hope that in such a modern world that it wouldn't impact us so much as potentially something like the World Wars did. And there was very much there was kind of two sides to it, really. You've got the camaraderie with some of the guests and some of the customers, of them really kind of empathizing with our situation, because like Dom's touched on, like, we are all humans, and as much as there's businesses, like, people don't identify so much with the big corporates these days, so they actually see the humans underneath, and the managers as well being human beings within that, and the guests, a lot of them identified with it. They realized how difficult it was for us, and they understood the fact that of most industries, hospitality is always the first to kind of be impacted by anything, whether it's a financial slump, whether it's health related, because we rely on so much on disposable income. We're always one of the first to be hit by something. So a lot of them, to be fair, were very, very giving, but you'd always, as with any scenario, get those that weren't quite as impressed, and regardless of what was going on in the world, they were the most important. And at the time, it was very much a case of appealing to their human nature, and rather than very much in the similar vein of listening to someone that may have any mental health concerns, or want to talk about it, it's finding the difference between sympathy and empathy, because we didn't need sympathy at the time. We didn't want sympathy from customers as such. We wanted a bit of empathy. We just wanted them to understand where we were coming from. So my experience, it was very much trying to tap into the human aspect of the guest if they were perhaps a little bit disgruntled at the time, and explaining that we're all in the same situation, we're all human beings, we're all trying to survive, as it were, and we're just trying to do what's best for everybody at the time, but still provide you as much of the usual service as we could. So it was very much trying to appeal to the humanity of people and really pulling out the empathy and not scraping for any sympathy, very much like you would do if you were having a conversation surrounding mental health.
Fabulous, thank you, Katie. Moving on to Dom. Dom, have you experienced much more conflict in the business sort of after the reopenings?
In terms of guests,
guests perhaps not following the rules, or behaving as we'd hope they might.
And they've been very, very isolated, those incidents, and I think again, I think that goes back to how we've approached it. We've equipped the teams with adequate training. The SOPs have been priceless. And then, I mean, I'll give an example. We decided, if you go back to reopening on the 4th of July, well, back then it was, you didn't, the whole mask thing, all the guidance was almost, you don't need one, it doesn't do anything. And up until the night before, we were like, should we do the mask? Should we not? And in the end, we decided, do you know what? If the guidance says we don't need them, so we're not going to do them. We felt that it was much more powerful for our service to be able to communicate clearly to the guests and put them at ease. We thought the masks kind of did the opposite at first. It was a little frightening. Obviously all that's changed, and we've embraced the masks as the guidance has asked us to. But what we found is the guests immediately were kind of appreciative of the steps we've taken, and 99% of our feedback emails which we receive from the majority of our guests were happy with the procedures we put in place. And yeah, it was just a case of embracing it, really, and just being, again, going back to transparency. These are the rules, please follow them, and people generally do behave. So yeah, again, nobody really misbehaving. So yeah, it's been,
perhaps the insight there that we can gain is that if, as leaders, in terms of the operation, we're getting the right procedures in place, good communications with the teams, being able to communicate with the guests, then the guest is going to feel less anxious coming in. They're going to feel safe. They're going to see it's well managed, well organized, and therefore their anxiety is going to be lower. So there's less likely for conflict to boil up, I suppose. Moving to Mark, any similar experiences with conflict, or perhaps in your time when you've been leading, how do you support your team members in dealing with conflict with guests?
I'll come back to that. I just wanted to pick up on what my colleagues were saying just now, and from a perspective of a client. So I've got 2 pubs locally that I've frequented post lockdown 1, and I had 2 completely different experiences. So in the first pub, I went to the door, and the first thing the guy said curtly to me is, "Have you got the app?" And you immediately thought, okay, well, I understand there's a process here. And from then on, once I'd got in the pub and I'd done everything that I was meant to do from a procedural perspective, it was then all you felt as a client or as a punter was process. And then I went to another pub about a week later, and the experience from the door to sitting down to then that whole process of being looked after was, I felt it was a venue of hospitality. And I think that has been the real challenge here, is how employees have been communicated to by their leadership teams in terms of, right, we've got processes here that have to be followed. So I'm going to train you in that, educate you in all those sort of things. But the other side of the coin is we are still a hospitality business. And it is still about making people feel at home, making people feel a level of warmth that they will go back to that business next week or in what we might perceive in the future as normal times. And at those 2 pubs, I will not set foot, regardless of how sorry I feel for the people that are working in that environment. I will not set foot in that first pub, but I will go back to the other pub every day of the week, because I felt that they grasped the process as well as the hospitality element, and the fact that it is about fundamentally looking after people regardless of the situation. But I had real empathy for those people in the first pub, because all I thought was maybe they haven't had the message about hospitality communicated as effectively enough to them. And again, from my own perspective as a leader, I mean, I wanted to know every single guest experience, good or bad, because you know, when something went wrong in my business, there was only one person I was encouraged to look at, and that was myself in the mirror, because was it processes I had in place that either were working or weren't working, but I was effectively the governor and the guardian of those processes. And I think leaders have to, and I think someone touched on it earlier, leaders have gone through this as well, and the difficulty leaders have is how do they communicate effectively to their teams and provide you know, leadership and guidance and be a figure that people want to follow, but they've got their own feelings as well.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm going to stay with you, Mark, as well, because this guardianship that you've talked about several times now of looking after your team members is really interesting. How far should leaders go in supporting team members, do we think? You know, what's the advice here? Because obviously the team members that are coming to work for us, they're bringing all sorts of problems, financial problems, family problems, housing problems. How far do we go? How far should leaders go in helping their teams resolve those problems?
I think often you can solve 3/4 of those challenges by just listening. And I think people often talk about the power of listening and active listening. And, you know, if I'm talking to someone, there are obviously methods and ways of understanding that someone is actually listening to me. But I think when an employee has a genuine concern and they're maybe bringing that to work, just the opportunity to talk about it on a human level and be heard on a human level can counter, in my eyes, 3/4 of the challenges. And I think it's almost a problem shared is a problem halved. They get it off their chest, and actually there is no need really to go any further than that, bar a check-in maybe at the next one-to-one. I mean, I religiously worked with little black books, and I'd write everything down, because just like a guest experience, the devil is in the detail. And when I go back and speak to that employee who has shared with me something very personal, I feel I have a responsibility then to check in. And the first thing I will say to that person is, you told me about this 3 weeks ago. How's it going? Because then they know I've listened. And writing things down, I'd challenge anybody to say that as human beings, we don't remember everything. And if we can write things down, we can refer back to them. And that thing we refer back to at a later date could really be that important aspect of motivation, that an employee goes, do you know what? My boss listened to me. He understands me. She understands me. And I can get on with my job again. So to me, it's all about the human level.
And thank you, Mark. Some superb advice there for leaders. And anything to add on that, Dom, from your perspective?
Yeah, I think how far you can help, I think listening is massive, letting people know you're there. And I think we actually, a plug for you, this Peter, but we trained myself and 2 of our managers with the mind map. So we've got mental health first aiders in the company, and we just make sure our team know that we're there for anything they might need help with. I don't think we should be ringing landlords or trying to sort out rent problems for staff. That's not our responsibility. But we can, like Mark said, we can listen, and that does solve 3/4 of the problem. It really might help them see something that they're not seeing, identify some blind spots, or give them new avenues to look at. But yeah, listening and being as supportive as you can be is really important. But I you know, there's a level of personal responsibility as well. We can't hold everyone's hand through every single struggle at the minute, but we can listen, and we can, you know, help where we can, and guide people and point them in the right directions where possible.
I think that's coming through as very sage advice, guys, that it's about supporting, isn't it? It's that leadership style of supporting rather than, you know, actively involving ourselves in all the problems that people are going through. Yeah, but to support them is a strong, you know, leadership activity we can do. Katie, what's your perspective on what you've heard said there?
Yeah, I mean, from more of a team leader's point of view, in terms of looking to my management, there's always a lot of stigma towards a lot of CEOs or managers think that they, as a leader, they can't show a weakness and that they have to just push forward. And I'm very much in the belief that that's not the view to hold. If a manager were to open up about their mental health and how they're feeling, if they just took 5 minutes to go, you know what, don't come to me with anything for the next 5 or 10 minutes. It's a bit busy at the minute. I'm going to take 5-10, just center myself, refocus, and then we'll come back and we'll attack it like that. As a team member, as a grassroots team member, that I would hold so much respect for that person, and also feel as though I could to open up and talk about it as well. But also in the same vein, if a manager or somebody in your team is that go-to person, say they've got the mental health first aid training, or they just happen to be that go-to person, and say to you, for example, you need to make sure that you're safeguarding yourself as much as you're looking to help that person, because then there becomes a bit of a cycle of over-promising and under-delivering. If you promise and you enter into an unspoken agreement with that person that you're speaking with regards to mental health or whatever's going on in their life, that's an unspoken agreement. And if you yourself aren't ready for that pressure, as it were, then it's only going to send yourself down a pathway that's not so good for yourself. So with regards to that, like Dom said, you know, not taking on too much of the burden, it's supporting, it's listening, but also recognizing that it's a safeguarding situation for yourself as well as the team member. And I think the team would respect that and see that, and that in a long-term sense would be incredibly helpful for your team and your organization.
I think that's great insight, Katie. And again, comes back to the word we were talking about earlier about, you know, the need for leaders to be authentic and just to be honest and to be human themselves, which is a tremendous trait and a very powerful leadership skill. I'm just going to dive to a question. I think it's from Adil, who talks a question for Mark and Dom. Given the announcements over the last few weeks and the light at the end of the tunnel, have you noticed a change in your teams and guests' mindset in terms of returning back to business, or are people still feeling anxious and skeptical about the safety elements of returning back to the restaurant, hotel, or event? So, so Dom, first of all, please.
In a word, no. I don't
Right.
think people are anxious. We saw before the second lockdown, people. We obviously traded the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and that was like 3 Saturdays. The Wednesday was like New Year's Eve. Go back to March, and the people walking through outdoors the day before lockdown, I think it was 2 over 3 restaurants. So that just gives a real stark comparison and the change that's occurred. And every time you do something for the first time, there's a level of apprehension, and we're reopening for the second time, and we're confident. We're taking it as seriously. We really are. Safety, health and safety will still be high on the agenda, but from like customer sentiment trackers, I think hospitality is going high up on that list. Like, you know, an interesting example of back after lockdown 1, there's lots and lots of restaurants all probably reduced the size of their menu to staff costs, understandably so, and I think there was a lot of operators thinking, oh, you know, the menu's reduced by 1/3. Do you think guests will be angry? And nobody cared.
Right, okay.
Nobody cared. They're happy to be out again. They're probably expecting a bit more this time around.
Right. Yeah.
I don't see menus growing, but I think we started to see the feedback towards the end of pre-lockdown, probably being a little bit more demanding of the hospitality again and the food, and yeah, that was a bit of a shift. And I feel going into December, people are comfortable and ready, and they'll go to places where they felt safe first time round. So I think we'll see the benefits of taking it seriously and operating as safely as possible from that period from July the 4th. So
Fabulous. Yeah. Thanks, Dom. And certainly some of the research we've seen would bear that out, that in following the first lockdown, the biggest area of guest and customers requirements was very much that safety, you know, safe environment, clean environment, you know, all the COVID rules, you know, being implemented. That's kind of moved down the line now as just something that's expected. So it's moved from being a sort of proactive motivator to actually a hygiene factor, excuse the pun. It's a given, it's expected. And so we do need to get back to those fantastic levels of hospitality, and I think we'll see guests clearly will be more confident coming back in. That's great to hear, Dom, and you know, that's hopefully leads to a positive new year. Particularly, I suspect December's going to be a bit crazy, isn't it? But in the new year, vaccines, all the rest of it, hopefully bodes well for us. Thank you. Thanks, Dom. And Mark, your perception on that question from Adil. So, you know, have you noticed a change in people's perceptions, either from a team perspective or a guest perspective?
Oh yes, I just think there is a great level of optimism. I think something we need to be very cautious about is if it does get to a level where it's even busier than before, and I know there are distancing restrictions potentially in a lot of businesses, there may be people that we're bringing back into the workplace that haven't been back yet. So they're going to be anxious because it'll be the first time that they'll have set foot back in their businesses potentially. They'll have the worry about how they get from home to work, you know, and there's still a fear around getting the virus in the winter months. Has my job changed from the one that I left before? Is it a different workplace with the restrictions that were not in place when I left that workplace that might be when I come back? And I think this is also something we need to be mindful of in the spring and beyond, when hopefully the vaccine has created some really positive results, is that business could come flooding back in a lot of sectors, and we need to be ready for that, not just from a planning and operational perspective, but you know, where we've gone from one extreme potentially to another. Are all our employees ready mentally for that, and are they geared up? And I think middle management has a really difficult challenge, that they've got to take the instruction from above, and then they've got to convert that to the guys on the shop floor and get those people as motivated as they were before, when everything has gone on in the last year, which has affected, I think Peter said, so many livelihoods and lives. So yes, there's optimism, but there's a lot of caution, I think.
I think very, very sage advice, and I hope Adil, that gives you some really good answers. I think summarising those perceptions there, or perspectives rather, you know, we're optimistic. It would seem that, you know, reopening 2 is going to be perhaps slightly easier, but there's still very much some anxieties involved that as leaders we can't overlook. And I think also there's, you know, a lot of the percentage of the industry hasn't yet reopened since lockdown 1, so they'll be going through this for the first time. So still some anxieties there amongst our team members and guests. And coming to Peter, something I'd love to explore, and for you to give us some insight. How could leaders encourage their team members to bring their whole self to work? And indeed, you know, what does that mean, and why is it important?
Okay. First and foremost, leaders need to bring their whole selves to work. I think Don was talking about it before, Katie was talking about it before, and Mark. And it's having the business leaders having that vulnerability to bring themselves to work. You can't expect your team members to bring their whole selves to work if you're not going to lead by example. And in doing so, and as I said before, if we show that human connection, if we show that vulnerability, and it's quite all right not to have all the answers as business leaders at this moment in time, because we're facing challenges that we haven't faced before. And that's quite okay to admit that, and as Katie was saying, allow that vulnerability. And also when we're coming back, we've got to think about coping mechanisms. We've got to think about our wellness and coming back into work. And as Mark alluded to there, is that when we come back, are we in that right space to be able to hit those challenges that will come? Because with the hospitality industry, it really has taken a battering this year. However, next year, when the vaccines come in, as Mark was talking about, and they're talking about Easter, and this is going to be where things will get back to some form of normality that we're talking about, is the business ready for that? And in what we're talking about in the business there, the wellness of the business, the mindfulness of the business, are they prepped and are they ready to go forward with it? Has everybody got the autonomy to do their jobs? Do they know what they're doing? Have they been given any upskill training that's needed? These new procedures that are in place, have they been communicated very clearly? And in doing so, and as I say, if you encourage, because historically what used to happen was you leave any personal problems in life at the door. That's how we used to operate within our working arena within this country and across the globe as well. That's now changed, and what's happening now is the encouragement of going, actually, you might be having an off few days, and that's all right to have an off few days and feel low, and know that the rest of the team are there to listen. And we've talked about listening and we talk about active listening, what people say. Simply put, listen to understand, don't listen to reply. Big difference. Yeah. And Mark was saying about taking notes and things like this. If you put that, just that simple thing in practice, if somebody said to me, I'm going to have a conversation with somebody, I'm going to go on to somebody else and I'm going to tell them exactly what happened. To be able to do that, you truly need to listen. So if you think about that and get in that mindset and go, what's this person telling to me? Not just what's coming out the mouth, that's 35% of our communication. How are they doing it with everything else? Their body language, their eye contact. Are they closed off? Are they open? Is it nice open body language when they're talking? And it's just been, as I say, being there to listen. And you're quite right, you can't support everybody on their individual one-to-one basis of things they're facing at this moment in time. But then as business leaders then think about it and go, all right, then what main areas my team members be struggling with? Housing, finance, mental health. Just get a group of resources together to be able to signpost people to. So if they are having problems with finances, is it the debt management website they need to look at, or the Mind website? They have an awful lot of stuff on there about finances and personal finances. So
I'm going to dive in there if I may, Peter, because we just had a very pertinent question coming in, which relates directly to what you're saying. So thank you, Patrick, for this question. Patrick talks about there's a lot of talk about supporting people when they are suffering. Is it time to start working on aspects of the industry that cause some of the suffering, working on preventative and holistic approach to mental, physical and financial health within the industry? So I'm going to whiz round us all. I feel a bit like Fiona Bruce here, but we've got 5 minutes left, so I'd like to get a perspective from everyone. So just a short response, if you may, and then I want to bring in one final last question. So I'm going to start with Katie. It was a bit of mouthful, my question of it, but there's a lot of talk about supporting people. What could we do in hospitality to create more prevention of these problems? Any thoughts?
I think it's very much having that the open conversation with regards to, like I say, realizing that we're human beings above anything else. We're human beings, and we need to focus on being human beings rather than humans doing. And we focus too much on the work and what we have to do to reach a certain point to make the money and whatnot. We need to realize that we're human beings, so we need to be those people. So having that conversation about how we feel can very much help us to do the things we need to do, but also still live and be real in the moment.
Fantastic. Sounds like very strong advice. Super. Dom, any thoughts?
Yeah, similar really. I think the key is building those relationships between your teams and between the people you manage, and understanding that they've got a life outside the four walls of work. You know, once you develop those relationships, you know what motivates people, you know what the dreams are, have those career conversations. Identify when they don't seem themselves, you know, ask them, are they okay? Or if they're not performing, it's you don't seem yourself, is everything all right? And giving them the chance to open up and doing it in a safe space, and yeah, just really promoting that culture of care throughout your company is massive.
Thanks for that, Dom. And I love the angle you took there, just thinking about performance, because I think, again, as leaders, when we see performance drop in individuals, perhaps we too readily assume that there's an attitude or another reason behind that why performance is dropping. We don't always seek to explore perhaps that something's going on that might be inhibiting that performance. So I think that's brilliant advice. Mark, your perspectives on that question from Patrick, please.
Walk the floor, get in and amongst it, and something I tried to do a lot was catching people doing things right. So, you know, we often, it's human nature, we focus on the negative. So catch people doing things right, plenty of positive reinforcement. Absolutely, we need to feed back, and in a way that it's development feedback, not in a blame way or a way that could be perceived as negative and destructive. So catch people doing things right, positive reinforcement.
Brilliant, thank you, Mark. And Peter, from your perspective, with the array of tools that you obviously see in place, what would be the top 3 things you could suggest that leaders could do to prevent problems occurring rather than resolving them once they come up?
Okay, yeah, so it's all about being proactive. Proactive, the first and foremost, is communication. First and foremost, communication with your teams. Be human. And realize that people can have things going on, like Don was saying, outside of work, and that could be impacting them there. And be available to listen. And probably them 3 things. There's all sorts of other things you can put in, but I'm not going to go into them now. But it's policy, procedure, and thinking about that. But I'm not getting into that. Just be human. and understand that somebody, and when we talk about, because what we do sometimes is we ask this thing, are you okay? And it's just like a greeting. Ask twice if necessary, are you okay? And they go, yeah, I'm fine. You go, no, actually, I am asking, are you okay? I want to know the answer to that question, because we go, good morning, you're right, yeah, I'm all right, and then we tootle off. It's just a greeting. It's pointless just even saying that question. So if we're going to ask somebody if they're okay, really mean it and be prepared to listen.
Sage advice. I'm going to squeeze one last question in, but it's going to have to be literally a one-sentence answer from us all, I think. So I'm going to start with Katie, but whiz round you all to hopefully end on a nice high note. So how could leaders encourage team members? Oh no, I'm going to go somewhere else. What can leaders do to help people feel good and have some fun at work? You know, we always talk about all these problems. How can we have some fun? Katie, top tips, how to have a bit of fun at work.
Talk about what you're enjoying at the moment. So is it music? Is it a certain type of food? Is it a podcast that you listen to? And just get to know the person behind the work self.
Perfect. Dom, having a bit of fun. How do you do it?
Good answer, Katie. Try and learn something new about a member of your team.
Excellent. Sage advice. Thank you. And Mark, top tip? Have a bit of fun.
Encourage people always to have something to look forward to.
That's nice. Like that one. And Peter, last word is with you, Squire.
As business leaders, I'd ask the members of staff to tell you one positive thing that's happened today.
Like that one as well. Ladies, gentlemen, thank you so much for your involvement on the panel today. It's been wonderful. I can't believe we've got through an hour already. I could happily sit here and chat all morning to you. Thank you to everybody that's joined us on the webinar today. We've had a great number on the webinar today. Thank you for the questions that have come through. I hope we've covered them all, and we hope to welcome you to our webinars in the future. But again, thanks to our panelists today, and we look forward to speaking to you very soon. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.